Welcome back to Bunny Banter, the first and only podcast for everything Killer Bunnies. I'm your host Matt, here with co-host Mikey.
Hello.
And as our special guest today, we have a professional Killer Bunnies novice, Faith.
Hello.
What are we talking about today, Mikey?
We're talking about, cards with unique rules.
Yeah, so by unique rules, we're talking about things that are only clarified within the bunny bits themselves, not on the card. And these are things that we wouldn't consider fundamental rules. For example, pawns are very critical rules to playing with the orange booster. However, the rules we're talking about today, you could be playing the game your whole life and you might not know these rules exist. So it's a bit of a controversial topic a little bit because certain people within the community don't like the existence of these rules because it's a lot of obscurity. And other people really like the uniqueness. So this bunny banter will be more so to present the different perspectives and not so much debate them. So that's why we have Faith as our guest today because she's relatively inexperienced. So it's good to have that inexperienced perspective when talking about the existence of these obscure rules. But before we get into the discussion, I have an announcement concerning the next episode. Next episode, we have been given the honor of having Jeff and Jonathan themselves as guests,
Woohoo!
which would be very exciting in itself. But even and also exciting is that we have been given the honor to be the first to publicly announce London-specific news. So we will be discussing the new cards that haven't been revealed yet, and shortly after the Bunny Banter, I'll probably post all the cards in the Discord. So that episode will be released September 6th, so make sure to keep an eye out on that.
We have not only been Jeff blessed, we have been Ultra Pro blessed.
That's right. At least so I've
Amazing.
heard. So I've heard from a third-party source. A third-party source told me I had permission, but that source is trustworthy, so we should be good. If not, Jeff will stop us. Or Jeff will get in trouble with Ultra Pro, and then we'll all have regrets. Something will happen, but it'll be exciting nonetheless. Okay. So let's get into the discussion here. For these unique rules, I thought of 4 different categories that we can talk about. So the first category here is unique rules that don't really have a large gameplay impact. So for example, right away from the starter set of Killer Bunnies, we have the 212 rule, which means that the person whose birthday is closest to February 12th gets to be the first player, the person who goes first. So Faith, when we're talking about unique rules that, don't necessarily have a very large gameplay impact, as a new player, how does that make you feel? If I say, oh, by the way, well, what's everyone's birthday? Because this person gets to go first.
Well, I have to say I don't know that I even knew that this rule existed until the last time we played. So, but that could be because I just knew the birthdays of the people that I was playing with, and it was just told who went first without this rule being explained to me. But I would say, as a new player, I think it's kind of fun to have some kind of wacky rules like this that don't maybe exactly make sense. It makes it for a good icebreaker when you're first getting together to play the game, is that immediately you find out everybody's birthday. Just kind of because really in this game, I don't know, I don't really see a whole lot of first turn advantage coming up. I mean, there are some cases in which I suppose it would happen, but so it's not really maybe prioritizing that this person is always going to win or anything. So I think it's kind of fun. I think it fits with the rest of the way that this game is played and with the social interaction piece that you guys like to talk about. I think getting to know everybody's birthday is just fits in with what this game is made for.
There you go. It also gives you a good excuse to ask for people's birthday if you don't remember.
That too.
How about you, Mikey? What are your thoughts on these types of rules? And if you want, you could also describe your sister's reactions as you've been teaching your family.
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, I have to say that that's something what Faith said. That's interesting. I never thought of that. It is kind of an icebreaker thing, and it's kind of cool. Have that social interaction. Um, Personally, I like the the 212 rule because normally I get to go first because my birthday's on February 19th. Although the last time that I played with my cousin, and my cousin, his birthday is closer to February 12th than mine is, so that was kind of disappointing. Um, when I first teach people, about the 212 rule, they look at me strangely. A lot of people kind of they want me to show them where it says it in the instructions, so I do. Um, but the interesting thing I think that I like more than the 212 rule is what happens if people either have the same birthday or their birthdays are the same distance away from February 12th, where it's the person with the oldest living grandmother. They get to go first. That makes it real interesting because then you have to try to figure out what your grandmother's birthday is. You have to give her a call.
There you
Find out
go.
how old she is. So
There you go. An excuse to call your grandmother.
there you
Pro
go.
strats.
And then she'll be really confused why you're calling just to ask her how old she is.
Hopefully she doesn't get offended.
Yeah. But I think it's kind of a fun thing, and it just kind of fits in with the whole rest of the game, having the kind of ridiculous, arbitrary rules and cards that they don't really make sense, but they're just a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. I think from the community, I I would take a guess to say that the 212 rule is the most ignored, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I think some of it is rooted in there is, strictly speaking, within the passivity meta. First turn advantage does not exist because any advantage that would exist would immediately be considered aggressive and usually is. Of course, in practice, that's not always the case, but that's the passivity meta for you. So the 212 rule is often ignored, and several groups will do just a die roll to see who goes first, which is fine as long as all players agree. But it's just interesting to see the logic of how people choose which rules they ignore and which rules they take. Because strictly speaking, this rule, the impact isn't that great. So, if you want to ignore it, then that's fine. I think it's quite fun.
Yeah,
And
it is.
creates some, going first every game, that's okay. It's not that relevant. Sometimes first turn advantage exists, sometimes it doesn't, and you have to play around it likewise. But it's just interesting. There's other rules that we could put in this category as well, like I'm trying to think of an example right now. What would be another rule that wouldn't have a large gameplay impact? Perhaps something like if somebody doesn't have a bunny, then the player with the most dollar gets the remaining carrots from them, which is very relevant. But the tiebreaker to that I've never seen be relevant, and that would be the highest identification number in hand. Very specific rules like that perhaps several people don't even know about, but
Yeah.
they're there, and they usually don't matter, but sometimes they do, and that's
Yeah.
kind of cool. I like the uniqueness it adds, but some people don't, and that's okay.
It makes it exciting then when you have a rule that you've never had to use before, and then it's like, oh, I get to use this rule now. This
Yeah,
is
it's
one
like, check it
specific
off the Killer
situation.
Bunnies bucket list. I finally got to use the oldest living grandmother rule. Okay, the next category we have here is unique rules that make cards weaker. So the example I have here is the Heavenly Halo. which is a very iconic card of the starter set. You know, you place it under a bunny, and that bunny can't be killed or abducted. For all practical purposes, it's immortal. It can be stolen, of course, but you know, that aside. The rule that's clarified in the bunny bits is that if that bunny is the player's only bunny, that player cannot play aggressive cards, except for choose a carrot. So it makes the Heavenly Halo bunny weaker for balance purposes. And there's several examples of this with different cards. You know, there's countless examples. I'm not even going to start listing them off because I'll get lost. Let's start with you, Mikey. What are your thoughts on instances where the bunny bits have to clarify some sort of weakness to the card?
Well, first I'll just talk about, kind of my feelings about the Heavenly Halo and then some of the issues that I've seen. The Heavenly Halo obviously is a wonderful thing well, actually, it's not necessarily a wonderful thing if you have it. Because if you have it and it's on your only bunny, then you can't play aggressive cards, and so you're just kind of stuck there. It is nice that you have an immortal bunny, and it's a little bit different than like the abduction, like being the Area 51 card, because at least you have a bunny in the bunny circle. But it still is, it's kind of a downer when it's your only bunny and you can't play aggressive cards, so you're just kind of stuck in this situation where you may have a hand full of weapons where you can't play any of them. But then it does give you the benefit of having the bunny. You have a bunny that you will pretty much have until the end of the game unless it gets stolen. One of the interesting things that I thought of with the Heavenly Halo, and I've had issue with not with people actually saying anything, but just in my head thinking that somebody may potentially not like this, is the idea that the Heavenly Halo can't play aggressive cards, and then aggressive cards are specified in the bunny bits as being any card with the pink rectangle. And some people might not view certain cards with the pink rectangle as being aggressive. And so I've always worried about that when I've been when I tell people that rule. I'm worried that they're going to come across a card and they're going to think, well, this isn't aggressive, but it has the pink rectangle. So that's the one issue with that. But it does make it easy to identify an aggressive card then when it specifically states it must have the pink rectangle, except for obviously choose a killer. But it can make it. I'm always worried that somebody's going to not like that rule. That's my thought.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point that I didn't think of initially, is that it actually requires a double clarification. First, the player has to know that if it's their only bunny, then they can't play aggressive. And second, they have to understand what aggressive is, which can be misleading at times. Because by the strictest definitions, everything with a pink box except for choose a carrot is aggressive. So even something like shuffleboard, which only has the ability to get a carrot, is considered aggressive by the strict definitions, although it could be clarified otherwise by Jeff, as it would make sense to do so thematically. But for mechanical purposes, we can't assume it to be non-aggressive. Faith, as an inexperienced player, let's just imagine a scenario here. You have a bunny and then you play Heavenly Halo on it, and not knowing the rule, you have a weapon as your next card, and then all of a sudden I'm telling you this rule. How does that make the inexperienced player respond to that situation?
I think it very much depends on your style of playing. I know, like from your talk on neutral versus aggressive versus passive players, I'm not sure exactly where neutral would fall in. Obviously, an aggressive strategy would not like not being able to play your weapon. From the passivity standpoint, though, it's an excellent card, because now you get to keep your bunny. you get to collect your carrots. None of your weapons are useful, but it doesn't matter because you didn't really want to kill anybody else's bunnies anyway. So I think it all depends on the style of the player or where they're at, and maybe at what point of the game this is being played. Because if you're playing at the beginning of the game, probably nobody's that far ahead that you would be super sad to not be able to play a weapon on them. Plenty of more opportunities later on in the game after you gain another bunny. But if you're talking mid to end game and you're playing against Matthew with 10 bunnies and whole sack of specials and going on.
Clearly I was playing aggressive.
Exactly. So if you're talking that scenario and you really wanted to get back at him for something he did 6 turns ago and now you can't, pretty sad. Probably the reason that you have a halo on your bunny, though, is because you want a bunny. And the only reason to, in my mind, playing from more of a passive standpoint, to really want a bunny is because you want to be able to win because you want the carrots and not because you really want to get at somebody else. So I don't know. It's one of those things where you just have to properly learn the game before you get too invested wholeheartedly into it. If you are going to be that angry about a rule, then you are clearly too invested in the game that you have not sufficiently learned. How much of the game you have learned should grow your love of the game. You shouldn't be that, that obsessive about it before you really understand all the rules, and you should be knowing that things will probably come up that you don't like.
That is a very excellent point. I've definitely seen some inexperienced aggressive players get really upset when I tell them this type of rule, because that in their minds they're thinking, oh, I found this completely overpowered combo. I'm going to have this immortal bunny. I'm just going to kill everyone else's bunnies. Then all of a sudden I tell them, oh, by the way, you can't play aggressive if that's your only bunny. They're like, the obvious response is, it doesn't say that on the card. And then, of course, I respond with, I know it doesn't say on the card. I know what the card says. I've memorized all the cards. It's in the rule book. And at that point, they're really upset. Completely agreeing with someone yet proving them wrong is it's not a pleasant scenario for them. Just like, yeah, it doesn't say it on the card. I'm well aware. You are correct. But for good reason it doesn't say it on the card, because strictly speaking there isn't enough space on the card, which is the case for all of the rules like this, like the Heavenly Halo, where we have all these exceptions listed in the bunny bits. And that's pretty much the purpose of the bunny bits is, hey, there wasn't enough room on the card to print this, we're going to put it here instead. As for the community responses to these types of rules, I haven't seen any people decide to omit these types of rules that weaken cards. I haven't heard of any group deciding, oh yeah, the Heavenly Halo can play aggressive, that's fine. It's unheard of. Maybe it exists somewhere, but
That would be a bad choice. I mean, if I were in a group, I wouldn't want to say house rule. We're going to allow Heavenly Halo to use aggressive cards, because what if somebody else gets it? Well, then they have an immortal bunny and you're gonna die.
Yeah, that's the problem when house rules aren't decided unanimously.
Yeah.
Is you run into situations like that, which is a whole other topic within itself, but definitely related. The next category here is kind of interesting. The category is unique rules that make cards stronger. So these ones are, I'd predict they're ignored sometimes, more so because people don't know them. But the example I have here is Straight Up, which is from the Steel Booster. It's the card that you roll the 5 dice, the 5 colored dice, and you can roll each one 3 times, and if you get 5 consecutive numbers, you can steal a save special or very special from each opponent. And that's what the text of the card says. However, in the bunny bits, it's clarified that if you get the numbers in the exact consecutive order with the colors violet, orange, green, yellow, blue, the exact order that they appear in the card, so much more difficult condition to get the colors in the exact correct order. You get to steal all save specials and berry specials from all opponents. Which is a ridiculous effect if you pull it off. I've never seen it done. At least I haven't seen it happen, because if it has happened before, we didn't know the rule at that point.
Yeah.
But it's crazy. So Faith, if this were to happen, obviously this isn't explained on the card. So if this were to happen during a game and all of a sudden I say, oh, by the way, since I got these in the exact correct order, I actually get to steal all of them, how would that make you, how would that make an experienced player feel?
Not very good, I would say. That is definitely one where I think I would be saying, show me the rule book.
And then after I show you the rule book and it's right there, how does that make you feel at that point?
Still quite sad. I would say, as a pretty inexperienced player, I probably don't make full use of my specials and very specials anyway, so in some sense I wouldn't probably be that sad, just because I might not really know what I even have, how to maximize what I have anyway, so if I lose them, it's probably not the end of my world for the game. But I know that could be pretty devastating with the amount that you can do with those saved specials and various specials. And yeah, the one thing though about this card is that you didn't really do a whole lot for it. I mean, you got the card, you ran the card through, since it's a run card, I see, and you rolled the dice, and you were successful. It's not something that you planned out to stack up just the right sequence of everything and the right specials and everything, all of the right pawns, and everything is all put together for this one moment where you're going to crush everybody.
Well,
It really is just
rerolls were certainly help in that situation, but yes, even with all of the pawns, let's say, even if you had 3 Omega pawns, I don't think you
yeah,
can
right.
very commonly get this.
Right. So if this really does happen, it's almost got to just be a high five, way to go, you made history kind of moment, and not quite so much of a you beat me for, I mean, that it's all about that you came after me and you were better than I was, or anything like that. More so just wow, I saw history happen, and this never happened. This is and I got to do that next time I play the games again, sort of thing. So I think it's cool that there are those extra clarifications that do change the cards somewhat anyway. But I don't know that I ever would have looked for further clarification on this card, since it seems pretty clear from what it says. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's the difficulty with both the previous category and this category, is a lot of these cards would seem to be self-explanatory. However, there are conditions in the bunny bits. For example, the really good example that I didn't plan here originally is Dude, Where's My Carrot from the red booster, which lets you roll the dice, and if you can guess where that carrot is, you get to steal it. However, not written on the card is that you actually have to gamble a carrot that you have to participate. So in order to play
Oh.
the card, you actually have to have a carrot, and that's not written on the card at all. It's all in the bunny bits. Because if you guess wrong, then you have to return that carrot.
I never knew that.
I think I told you once, Mikey. But yes,
Yeah,
it's one of those ones that's really difficult to remember because it's not
Mhm.
written or implied on the card at all.
Wow. Huh.
Mikey, what are your thoughts on abilities such as Straight Up, where all of a sudden we have this really rare scenario that something amazing happens?
First, I'm still in shock about that dude, where's my carrot? I played that in a game with you too, and I must have just forgot. Okay. Anyway, to this part, and I have to think about I have to organize my thoughts. Okay. The first thing that I want to say, this has nothing to do with the actual like rules or anything, but I like the artwork on this card.
I
Um,
agree.
I I think it's neat how Jonathan decided that he took the word straight up and made it Bunny holding something that's an allusion to 7 Up. That's kind of cool. Um, it even says "by Fizz" down in the corner there. Um, and then also I wish that the bubbles in Pop actually left they went floating up in the air. That'd be anyway.
Yes.
I digress. Um, so these kind of cards. First off, if you are an inexperienced player playing with someone who is experienced and knows that there are other uh, rules to this card or something like it, um, if you're playing with somebody who's less than honest, you could be taken advantage of because you may get that the violet, orange, green, yellow, blue in consecutive numerical order. And you might not know that if you get that, you get to take all of the save specials and very specials. Um, and that person could, that person might not tell you. That would be less than. If I found out later, I would be kind of upset.
That would be very aggressive of them.
That would be aggressive. And I'm guessing that it's entirely within the rules of the game.
It would be.
But that's kind of just not nice. Santa Claus wouldn't bring them presents that year.
Jeff would not bless them.
Jeff would not bless them. Neither would Ultra Pro.
Neither would Ultra.
um, let's think here. I had another thought here. Um, I can't remember what it was. It was something so profound it would have changed the course of history, but
Sad day.
I guess it wasn't in the cards.
It was not in the cards. I think these unique rules that make the card stronger, I think these are the most commonly unintentionally ignored. Because for cards like Straight Up, they seem so straightforward, you might say. Haha. there's my bi-weekly pun for the bunny banter. Yeah, they seem so straightforward that you should have no need to look at the bunny bits, but all of a sudden if you look at the bunny bits, you'll find, oh, by the way, here's this extra advantage that you'll find. And you would never think that it would be there. It reminds me of, there's a card from Conquest, Scotty doesn't know, and there's a condition on that card where if, I'm going to look it up right now to make sure I don't butcher it. Hold on 1 minute. Thank you, Bunnypedia. There's a condition on Scotty doesn't know, where if the word Scott appears in the opponent's name, or if the opponent is a noted fan of James Doohan, written proof required, then the card its effect is doubled, which he'd have to pay double the money. It's crazy. You would never think that that would be there, but all of a sudden, oh, by the way, your name is Scott, so you're gonna have to pay double. They would think I'd be making it up entirely. I don't even know who James Doohan is. I haven't bothered to look it up. But it's crazy the types of rules that you might find, and they're so commonly ignored because people just don't know they exist in most cases. But
James Doohan is He played Scotty
Oh,
in the
okay.
original Star Trek, and he's actually not Scottish. He's Canadian.
There you go. Now we know. So yeah, it's interesting these types of rules because as soon as you tell a person about them, then they'll think you're making up rules as you go, which a lot of Killer Bunnies rules they seem like they're made up as you go. But then as soon as you show them in the rule book, then they're just in shock. Like, wait, that's actually a rule? No, can't be.
I remember when I first started, the first time I played full set, and you had warned me that there are gonna be rules that aren't gonna make any sense, and you're gonna question them. But that's the way they are.
It's the way it is, yeah. It's convenient when you have a player who's generous enough. I quote unquote generous. Realistically, it's within the passivity meta. It's completely a valid strategy to be generous. Generous enough to remind players of the rules. For example, in the first full set game with Mikey, I reminded Hayden to purchase the medals, and because of that, he lost the game. Because he had too much money at the end, so he was a target. Pro strats.
Yeah.
There you go. Lesson learned. Help people out, and they'll lose. It's completely proven. Flawless strategy in every way. Your opponents can't win if they're winning. There you go. Okay. Moving on to the the final category here. They are unique mechanics that are difficult to explain. So the previous rules that we just described are simple. You know, it's like, oh, if this happens, then this happens. It's fairly straightforward. The example I'm going to give in this category are the Psi cards, which are 12 cards within the chocolate booster, such as Shazbot. And Shazbot has its card text, of course, but then all of a sudden, on the left of the card, you see these arrows and kites, and there's no description of what they mean on the card. So then you have to refer to the bunny bits, of course, and the bunny bits explanation is fairly lengthy. What they actually do is if you have a card with an arrow and a card with a kite in your hand or saved, then you can, in between two players' turns, you can play both cards. Also, if they happen to be the same color, for example, if you got Horton Hates a Who and Pucker Up, which are both red, you can discard both of those in between two players' turns and reposition all bunnies of that color. Now that is a very long explanation for 12 card relevance. And the reason I categorize these separately is that's not something that can be explained to your opponents as you play the game. You know, I've narrowed down teaching full set to about a 5-minute lecture, and the rest of it is taught as you go. You know, all these unique rules of, oh, the Heavenly Halo, only, you can't play aggressive. That's fine. You can teach that as you go. But the side cards you really can't teach as you go because as soon as you mention, oh, by the way, if you happen to get any of these, then we're going to add more rules. Then all of a sudden you know your opponent's hand, so you're giving yourself more advantage. And everyone's going to get lost in all those obscure rules that are really likely to be irrelevant. Before this Bunny Banter, I don't think I even taught Mikey the side card rules.
No, you told me this about like 5 minutes before we started. So.
Yeah, because they're that commonly irrelevant. My hope when teaching full set is always to teach side cards by example and never by explanation, which is probably even a worse habit. Just be like, oh, by the way, I get to do this now. I get to just casually play 2 cards from my hand in between 2 turns. Seems fair and balanced. That only I knew that I could do that. Faith, as an inexperienced player, if we were playing full set and all of a sudden I say, oh, by the way, I get to play these 2 cards from my hand right now. It's not even close to my turn. I get to play them. What would your thoughts be?
Well, knowing that you are an expert at this game and that you do play honestly, I would know that it is true, so I wouldn't question that out of you at least. But um, it would then kind of delve into this whole explanation of why does this card reflect that, and what other cards do that, and what in the world do I have in my hand that I don't know how to use yet. And I think it instantly makes the game a lot more complicated for a new player and a lot more intimidating, and therefore, in some sense, a lot less fun if you don't already know most of the rest of the game pretty thoroughly. I mean, if this is the part that you're throwing into a game for the first time and you know most of the rest of the cards or are pretty familiar with the game, you've played, if not full set, at least a lot of the other expansions before and have a pretty good familiarity with your strategy and which cards you'd like to use, then throwing this into a game in any form is not going to be too bad, I don't think. And I don't know that there is a good way to do it, like you said. Whether you do it by example or do it by explanation, either way, probably it's going to be hard to understand until it's led by example anyway. So probably just isn't a good way to do it. However, if you're giving this in full set to people who have not been active players in the game, especially if they have not grown to love the game yet, probably going to make some enemies pretty quickly, I would imagine.
Probably. It'll also depend on the quality of the cards played from the hand. For example, playing Shazbot directly from the hand, that's not too relevant unless you have an opponent that swears a lot, then, well, they had it coming.
Correct.
But, I don't know. Some of the side cards could be relevant. Mikey, your thoughts on, now that you know side rules exist, your thoughts on them?
Well, I'm wondering, and perhaps this is something that we can ask Jeff on our next podcast, but why did he do this? What in the world caused him to decide, I'm going to create this type of card that only in these specific circumstances, at this specific time, can you play this? Um, and it's going to be so difficult to explain that people just aren't going to explain it, and it's probably never going to be used unless somebody thoroughly reads through the bunny bits. Um, that I would like to ask Jeff that, and also then in turn, and after that, ask, are there any cards you regret making?
Yes.
And that goes back to the Sharnak PTSD. Feels bad. Every episode we have to go back to Mikey's Sharnak PTSD.
Yes.
That's classic.
But yeah, so I mean, now I'm just trying to think. I'm going through and thinking, how could you explain it? I mean, I suppose that you could dig through your entire full set deck and find one of these cards and say, okay, this is you do this at this time, and then it never happens and everybody forgets. I don't know. Or you just suggest that they listen to our podcast.
There you go.
Get more
Pro strats.
listeners. Yeah. I don't know. I just think it's kind of pointless. And it would be interesting to see a list of all the cards that have this. That
They're
are
all in
side cards.
chocolate,
Okay.
I think.
Because it would be interesting then to see if there are any cards that are actually like really good that could be used.
Let's see, I could list them off here for you.
Okay.
Spider Bunny, not that relevant. Bunny Eye for the carrot guy, it's worth about 1 carrot. Shazbot's a fairly high impact one in certain
Yeah.
situations. After Darkness is very situational. Pucker Up is dangerous to play and not that relevant. Hitch Bunny's Guide. It's somewhat relevant, but also not really. Dr. Xavier here is somewhere relevant, but not really. Meteor Rock's really good against supers. And Horton Hits Who, fairly irrelevant. And let's see, 3 more. Bunny's Gathering, fairly irrelevant. Indiana Clones is somewhat high impact. But it begs the question, if you're playing this from your hand, you're not actually gaining that much tempo because you're replacing your hand with weapons anyways, so it doesn't actually save you much time. You don't get the strict advantage. Psycore controls all of those, so since all of those are fairly irrelevant, that one is also fairly irrelevant. So in some sense, these cards are specifically designed to be slightly lower value, with their added benefits of being able to play them directly from the hand and to potentially steal bunnies of that color if you get the pair. So that's there you go. That's part of the design reasoning from Jeff. As for why these cards specifically have it, I would guess that it would have to do with the Sai series was originally released as promos before it was re-released in Chocolate Booster, along with 2 other series of promos that were released, the Omega series and the New series.
Yep.
So they were promo cards, so they were special, we'll say.
Okay.
That's probably
I will
the
have to
reason.
say, I do rather like the idea of the Shazbot card that we are looking at, though, that you keep the game going. And I'm kind of wondering what circles you're playing in where this would be a really relevant card. How mad do your players get while playing Killer Bunnies?
I've met a few, but unfortunately Shazbot wasn't in those games. Those were remixed. However, the common strategy among groups of clean players is to play Shazbot on yourself, so that if you get into a situation where you don't have a bunny at the end, all of a sudden you have an out where you can just return carrots. You have to say a few swear words, but you can return carrots.
Well, it says naughty words.
Well, yes, so
you could clarify that as whatever
that is clarified by the group. That is clarified by the group. So yes, whatever your group defines. The only ruling that are in the bunny bits on that is that Shazbot is always an acceptable substitute. And there we go. We have another obscure rule that's not relevant to gameplay. So that's funny how we came full circle there. Shazbot actually fits in 2 of these categories.
There we go.
So that's always fun. Sai rules are, I don't know how to explain them well when teaching full set. I always just ignore them, just because, you know, I already narrowed down full set to a 5-minute lecture. Adding a 12-card relevance is not relevant enough to in the initial teaching. Maybe after 8 games of full set within a group, which is quite a few. I might mention, oh, by the way, these cards do something extra. I might mention it. Or if somebody asks during the game, what is this arrow here? Then I might mention it at that point. But even then, it's very rarely relevant. And as more bonuses get released, it'll continually become less relevant. Unless Jeff decides to print more side cards, and then we'll have fun, I guess. So that would be interesting. I think the only clean way to teach this mechanic, besides waiting until all the players are experienced enough, well, I suppose the situation I'm about to describe would be the players would be experienced anyways. But as you're adding boosters one by one, realistically, this is the only new mechanic in the Chocolate Booster. Realistically. So if you were to add just Chocolate Booster by itself, all the other cards are fairly self-explanatory, so you could teach this mechanic at that point. So, as the game is designed to be, it works.
There you go.
For throwing players into the deep end of full set, not so much. There you go. Now that's some good advice for the listeners is add boosters one by one.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts before we close here?
I had a couple thoughts that don't necessarily have to do with the cards we were talking about. Well, the first thing I realized, Faith is the first woman that we've had on our podcast.
Congratulations, Faith.
Why,
Yay!
thank you.
Oh, and then the other thing I thought is for anybody who's not from the Midwest, earlier I mentioned pop. That is also called soda. There you go.
There we go. We have officially clarified. We should put that in the bunny banter bunny bits.
There you go.
Once that gets written.
There you go. Yeah, you
Okay.
can write that. I got other things I gotta do.
That's right. Well, so do I, so maybe it'll get written eventually. Okay, thank you, Faith, for joining us today on Bunny Banter. We had a slightly shorter episode than normal, but that's what we planned. If anybody listening has any topic suggestions or would like to be a potential future guest, feel free to contact me in whatever way you want. Anything you'd like to say, Mikey?
Jeff Bless.
Jeff, bless.